Okay, so this is part one of three videos that you're going to look at today to help you fill out your notes. So we're going to go through here, talk about some major topics in our new baby nation that we've created here after the American Revolution. So we're going to start here, and the first in our scrapbook is an early drawing of the White House in our new nation's capital. So we're going to start with number one, the unanimously chosen American hero, George Washington, our very first president, first in war and first in peace. So George Washington, who serves in office from about 1789 to 1797, is unanimously chosen by the Electoral College, and we'll talk about that later. But basically, this guy is unheard of in the world of politics because everybody wanted him. Now, he was not voted in by the people as much as he was straight up chosen. So this is the chosen one. All right, he believed in providence, which is he believed there was a higher power, God that led and guided all things, and he believed in public virtue, meaning that you should be a good American. You should be a good citizen for your country. Now, his vice president, the very first vice president we had, is a guy named John Adams, who was pretty much a cranky New Englander. And Washington enters this term in office, and they don't even know what to call this guy first. President is one of the last names chosen. They talked about King Washington. They debated calling him His Excellency. So this was a guy that was filling an office that was totally unheard of. I mean, this was crazy for a new nation to create this kind of a government under this kind of a leader. So, go America. Okay, now one of the parts of the Constitution that we will get to when we look at that is the judicial branch. And the judicial branch is very, very vague on how much power it has. And we're going to see this guy named John Jay, who's going to become the first Supreme Court Chief Justice. Now, the Supreme Court is the ultimate court in the land. It is the court of all courts. And this guy is the first Chief Justice. This is the first head honcho of the Supreme Court. And in 1789, also, same year Washington's elected or chosen, they're going to create something called the Judiciary Act, and that's going to tell how the judicial branch would operate. So that's information for later on. They're also going to create a national bank to try to take care of some of the debts that America has racked up, some of the money that we owe other people. And the new national bank is going to be the beginning of a big problem, which you'll look at more in eighth grade and then in your freshman year of high school. So I mentioned debt, and it was huge. I'm talking like $54 million as a nation and $22 million as states, 13 little states. So, I mean, this is a huge amount of money that we're talking about. And there's a guy named Alexander Hamilton who's hit the big time now because they just had a Broadway musical that was made about him with songs and dancing and everything. So I guess that's when you finally made it as an old dead white guy. But he becomes the first Secretary of the Treasury, which means he's in charge of this national bank. And he says that we're going to pay the debt off through a national bank, bonds and tariffs, which are like taxes on the people, by selling land, and then assumption, which is the government is going to take over all the state's money problems and solve them. And he is going to go head to head with Jefferson. They never actually met and dueled. It would have been awesome if they did, but there were no shots fired, no punches thrown. But they do argue back and forth in papers and in books and publicly over the bank issue. Okay, another big thing in Washington's presidency is called the Whiskey Rebellion. And out in western Pennsylvania, especially, the frontiersmen, they made whiskey. That's what they drank. And one of the ways that the government thought of to get some money back was to tax whiskey. It's called an excise tax. And this is the frontier's most popular drink. And these guys are not going to like it that something that they've been able to make and sell and buy without any kind of taxes on it is all of a sudden going to be taxed. And we're going to see that problem happening again and again in the early years of our nation. Americans were so ticked off, and you guys remember this, so angry about all the taxes before the American Revolution. They're not going to want to pay taxes now that it's over. But then you have the same problem of how are you going to raise money for your country. But all right, in 1794, you've got some farmers out in western Pennsylvania that are going to protest through mob violence. So they're going to be big groups of people that are very, very angry about these taxes on their whiskey. And Washington has to make a decision. Should he allow for people to express their anger and refuse to pay these taxes, or should he enforce the government? Should he make the people do what the government says? And he ends up sending a militia in. He ends up sending soldiers in to stop this rebellion. So what's the big deal about all that? A bunch of guys out in the western part of Pennsylvania are mad about taxes on their liquor. Well, the big deal is that it proved that violence will not change the law. Government will change the law if the law needs to be changed. Okay, speaking of out west, there's a place that we know known as Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin. That was called the Northwest Territory. And the Northwest Territory was earned through war, through the peace treaty in the American Revolution. And this is some of that land that Hamilton was going to sell off to make some money. And we've got two ordinances here. We've got a land ordinance and a Northwest ordinance. And I know this is a lot of information coming at you, but if you need to pause and go back and catch anything up, go ahead and do that. And when I get back, I will make sure to tell you the most important things that you need to know. But this land ordinance and this Northwest ordinance have a couple differences. First of all, the land ordinance divided land. That's how you can think of it. Land divided land. The Northwest is governing land. So the land ordinance says this is how the communities will be divided. This is how the land will be divided. And the Northwest ordinance said this is how the land will be governed. This is how we will rule. So the territory becomes townships. They give 1 acre to public education because one of the things that will be very, very important in our new republic is educating people on the short, brief history of this nation, the struggles that they had, and how to be a good citizen. So in the Northwest Ordinance, these townships or these territories are controlled by the federal government until they could get about 60,000 people, and then they could become a state. Now, one of the things that's going to tick a lot of people off and is going to be a stepping stone towards the Civil War is that the Northwest Ordinance outlaws new slavery in the Northwest Territory. So if you are already there and you have slaves, great, keep your slaves, but you are not allowed to have any kind of new slavery. There's no buying or selling of slaves in this territory. Now, the end of Washington's presidency, this is the guy that sets the precedent. This is the guy that paves the way for the rest of the presidents. He steps down voluntarily after 2 terms. He says that is enough time for one person to be in office. And in his farewell address, he warns the nation of factions, which are different groups that split off and argue amongst themselves, kind of like political parties that we have today. Foreign entanglements, getting involved with other nations, and division. He says that we are a little tiny baby nation and we have to stay to ourselves. We cannot get wrapped up in other people's problems if we want to survive. And then that leads us to John Adams, which is our second president, Puritan patriot and pretty cranky. So this is the end of the first video, and then come back and pick up on part 2.